unethical marketing categorically does not work. If somebody is doing unethical marketing, they're either doing one of two things, or they're going to end up doing one of two things. They're going to hurt their brand, and they're going to drive away the existing clientele. Ultimately, it's a zero-sum game because the HPCSA will catch up with you, or your competitors will catch up with you. An interesting thing to note about ethical complaints. You do know that it only goes onto the HPCS radar when somebody else complains about you. So when you are actually trying to grow your business, you're going to be very, very careful to make sure that you market within the lines, because somebody might think that it is a zero-sum game and you're stealing their lunch. So you need to make sure that you are painting within the lines and that you are doing everything that you possibly can to acquire patients into your business, into your practice, in a way that is above scrutiny. It's lazy, it hurts your brand, it endangers the patient, and it harms the profession. You have a responsibility, and we'll go through the legislation in a moment. You have a responsibility not only to yourself as a clinician and a representative of your own profession, but to the profession at large, your colleagues, and also to your patients. So the rules, in order to play any game, and I like to think of business as a game, it has metrics of success, there are actions you need to do to improve, and there are ways to win and lose. Okay? So if you think about the business of private practice, the game of private practice, there are rules that you have to follow, lovingly stipulated by the HPCSA. Okay? These rules are to remain compliant in your business. To play the game, or in order for you to understand the rules, you need to be able to, in order for you to play the game, you need to understand the rules, and therefore, you need to remain compliant in business. You need to understand the rules, because if you understand the rules, you're able to play the game better. You're able to understand how you can improve your own scores, and it also gives you a bit of a competitive advantage. Now, this might come across as slightly controversial, but at the end of the day, and I think if we search deep in our hearts over here, you're running a business and there are competitors out there competing for market share. You have a responsibility to your employees, and you have a responsibility to yourself and to your family to promote your business in the best way possible so you can provide for them. However, you need to make sure you do this in a way that does not besmirch, rub a black stain on any of your colleagues, because remember, you also have a responsibility to the profession. But understanding the rules gives you a competitive advantage, because now you can play in a space that others wouldn't even think about because they have not educated themselves as to what they can and cannot do. Obviously, to avoid to elevate your brand and position, and to add integrity to the industry, and to be successful without reproach. So, documentation to consider. I have done the research for you. I've sat down over many a year, read through all the legislation that is available, and there is still more to read through. But there's over 1,500 pages of ethical legislation, if you've got the time, that you should read through. That includes national legislation like the National Healthcare 61, National Act 61 of 2003, obviously all the HPCSA ethical guidelines, the policy documents on business practices, the policy documents on desirable business practices. The HPCSA judgments are particularly interesting. They do name names and they do give context. It makes for very interesting reading of what not to do. And then the HPCSA has very handily given us a handbook of those judgments that are applicable to what you need to do today. Something very interesting about that handbook was, if we look at the specific cases that relate to advertising, marketing, canvassing, and touting, the last case that the HPCSA deems relevant to insert into their guide was in 2003. In fact, before that, 2001, and before that, it's early 1990s and 1980s. Now, a lot has changed since then. And I'm hoping that I can start a conversation with them very soon to update that, or at least update the documentation as we go along. And of course, your society or association's guidelines on ethics as well. So what is marketing? I'm not going to use the HPCSA's definition just yet. We'll get to that in a second. But marketing is the process of making known. This is the most simple and distilled definition of marketing that I could find. It's the process of making known. Okay? So if you think about any activity you're doing, that's ultimately the North Star you're aiming for. It starts with an offer. What are you offering to the market? The HPCSA has very clear guidelines on what you may and may not include in your offer. We'll get to that in a minute. No secret sauce, no I'm the best at this, no kind of like a magician act that you have. There are certain rules that you have to follow with regards to the offer that you're putting forward. The awareness, how do you make people aware of your services? What mechanisms do you use? What technologies do you use? And then finally, the sale. A sale happens when the money that someone has in their hand is exchanged because they feel that the value that they're going to get from you is more. This is why some people are willing to pay up to upwards of 300% of medical aid rate, because they feel that the value that they're receiving is worth that amount of money. So what are the 3 pillars of ethical healthcare marketing? Again, distilled for you. This is taken from the legislation, and I've tried my best to summarize it so you have a take-home message. First, do no harm, okay? We've all taken that oath. We all know exactly what that means. If you start from a place of wanting to be for the patient and for the profession, I find that it will be very difficult for you to actually transgress any of the HPCSA guidelines. Then, be professional. You have a responsibility to your profession, and you have a responsibility to conduct yourself in a certain way. If you conduct yourself and take yourself seriously as a professional, you will not do unscrupulous things like doing funny TikTok dances, okay? And then finally, serve first. If you have a servant-heartedness about you, there is enough patients out there for everybody to serve. We are in a healthcare crisis at the moment where we do not have enough hands on the ground to serve the population at large. And so if you have servant heart, you will be able to find your people, your tribe, your patients. Okay, let's get into the tough stuff. So what I've done is I've looked through all 17 booklets of the HPCSA's ethical guidelines, and I've picked out relevant portions that apply specifically to advertising, marketing, and creating an offer for your practice. Booklet 1. What are some of the takeaways from there? You have a duty to your patients, obviously. You have to have your patient's best interests at heart, respect for your patients. You have to make sure that you have informed consent for everything you do within your business. The patient's right to participate in their own healthcare, you have to make sure that they are a participant and that they actively understand what it is you are doing for them and to them. You have to give them access to care. You have to obviously resolve potential conflicts of interest, and you have to make sure that you are impartial and that you are just in your actions. Your duty to society, I've gone through that quite a bit already, and your duties to colleagues in the profession, I've mentioned to it. This is in booklet 1, the HPCSA clearly outlines this, that you have these 3 duties and responsibilities. So what are the takeaways with regards to marketing? In any marketing strategy you come up with, always keep the well-being of the patient central to your efforts. Never bring the profession into disrepute. Make sure you do not use any cheap tactic like comparing yourself or claiming superiority over another colleague of yours. It does happen, guys. It is a one-way ticket to a HPCSA ethical hearing. Do not do it. Do not even slight at doing it. It will land you in hot water so quickly. Booklet 2. Ethical Professional Rules for Healthcare Professions Council of South Africa. A deep dive into it. Now we get into the juicy stuff of advertising, canvassing, and touting. Now there's a lot of misinterpretations or misunderstandings about these 3 words: advertising, canvassing, and touting. And let me just say, I've mentioned this to the HPCSA directly. I'm not a fan of the interpretation. It leaves so much open, and I find, and probably the reason why, and Tasneem will back me up on this one, probably the reason why we see so little actual cases on this is because they haven't really done a good job of defining it, of what it actually is. In fact, the one example they give, which is arbitrary in my opinion, is that you may not advertise that you have Wi-Fi in your waiting room, or you may not advertise that you give coffee to guests when they arrive, because that sits outside of your core services as a surgeon or as a doctor or as an allied health worker. I think we could have gone into a little bit more detail as to what those things mean. Canvassing, as we all understand it, looks very much like this. You get a pamphlet, you get a pamphlet, you get a pamphlet, you get a pamphlet, knock, 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 knock. It becomes, because when is enough enough? So the HPCSA says that you may make your professional services known and that you have a right to do so. They don't inherently have a problem with you giving out a pamphlet, but not too many, not too much. What constitutes too much? And these are the questions that we had to battle with the HPCSA on and understanding clear definitions on. Up until now, we are left with this very vague definition. And so I have to call upon your higher sort of calling. Serve first, do not harm, be professional, and that will guide you. If you're handing up pamphlets into mailboxes, are you canvassing, are you harassing people? Because canvassing denotes a feeling of cheapness. It denotes a feeling of almost showing that the profession is desperate. It besmirches the profession in a way if you're handing out at the local street. And I think that's just the problem that the HPCSA has with this particular thing. But is handing out pamphlets into a mailbox once every 6 months sort of over-servicing or sort of canvassing? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. Having adverts on Google, is that canvassing? Because you're showing that to everyone who types in the search word, doctor near me, physio near me, plastic surgeon near me, neurologist near me. Is that canvassing? Because it's being shown to multiple people on a device? I don't know. But what I can tell you is, when I look at the guidelines, there is no clear sort of painting of this particular technology or this particular way of making your services known. And there is no case at all in the last 20 years on anything with regards to this kind of thing when it comes to the digital side of marketing. Is it bringing the profession into disrepute? I don't believe so. Is it making you seem less professional if you've got a good landing page, a good website? I don't believe so. So what I'm essentially want to leave you here with is that there's lots of questions that we need to ask about the legislation. But if you follow those core principles, I think you'll be fine. Secret remedies. Something we do see, however, that there's a categorical line in the sand on. You cannot, as a healthcare professional, state that you have a particular way of doing a surgery that is sort of patented to you, that is copyrighted to you. The literature, the published literature is ultimately our ultimate guide on how we ought to act. So you coming with a secret source, with a secret remedy, with a secret, let's call it IP, to the market, can be seen as unethical and can be seen as you lifting yourself above another practitioner. Now, what does that constitute in terms of how do we spell that out? Again, that is for the HPCSA to determine, but they don't give us clear guidelines on those things. If I say that, for example, I have got 25 years of experience, and in my experience, I have found that this particular treatment methodology works, is that secret source? I don't think so. Somebody else might disagree. You're simply stating your experience. When you talk about your characteristics as a professional as well, when you're talking about the fact that, this comes back to advertising and touting and canvassing, when you talk about the fact that you are a friendly, approachable, open to engage professional, are you highlighting characteristics that are outside of what your profession calls you to be? Or is that something that is unethical? Again, the legislation does not make that clear to us. However, does it help the patient if you show yourself to be a friendly, approachable, sort of even fun-loving medical practitioner? Of course it does, because the patient feels more comfortable with you. They're more receptive to your care as a result. And there are many, many, many studies we can point to where a receptive clinician ultimately gets more out of the patient and leads to better outcomes. So you see how these things clash sometimes. And that's what I'm trying to highlight over here. I'm going to move on further. So the takeaway, be honest in your messaging. Do not sensationalize your profession, and do not make unfounded claims about your expertise. Do not arouse fear and panic in the community in a cheap way to draw attention. In other words, if you do not come for this spinal surgery by this date, you will be paralyzed. Come see Dr. XYZ tomorrow. That is categorically unethical, because you are inciting fear and you have not done an assessment on that patient to be able to make that determination. So be very clear, because we do know that fear-mongering and inciting a sort of emotion in a consumer, let's call it, will result in your phone ringing. It is cheap, it brings the profession into disrepute, it is categorically unethical. Do not do it. Booklet 5. I'm going to move through this one. This is fairly straightforward with regards to confidentiality. I specifically want to highlight when we choose to use patients in testimonials, whether it be written or on video, you have to obtain consent. If you are a practice that is shooting content, which is not unethical, shooting content inside of your practice walls by displaying certain education, or certain type of education you want to put out into the market, by maybe giving a patient's journey, be sure you obtain consent. But even more so, even if you're talking in your office, make sure there's nothing in the background that alludes to a patient, like a patient's name or a patient's folder, or anything that could identify a patient to an audience. Just be very aware of that. Make sure that you go through the rights of the patient and give them all the information they require. Only ask them what you've told them. Only ask them what you've told them you're going to ask. Nothing more, nothing less. Do not incite any kind of emotion in them that would lead them to break down or become overly emotional for trying to either get views or trying to get some kind of reaction out of your audience. Moving along very swiftly again. Ensure privacy of your patients. If you want to use them in case studies, get their permission. Booklet 10. Moving on to telemedicine. Something that has recently come into the fore with obviously COVID-19, bringing telemedicine right up to the front of the healthcare experience now. Some things to consider. If you're going to be engaging in telemedicine in any way, shape, or form, know that it does not stop at just doing a Zoom call with a patient, a WhatsApp call with a patient, or using an app like that's in the Innohealth stable, My Pocket Health. It doesn't stop there. If you have a blog, if you have a website, if you have a social media page, if you have asserted yourself as a clinician in another video's comments, and you dispense advice, you have technically entered into a patient-practitioner relationship. And you need to understand that there are consequences should you continue to dispense advice in that particular forum. Understand that. I know you might be trying to do something good for the patient, but it leaves you at risk. It makes you susceptible to all kinds of regulatory codes of conduct violations, and you will find yourself on the very bad side of no good deed goes unpunished. Sometimes we just try and help. Guys, this also goes to WhatsApp groups, eh? So if you are in a WhatsApp group and somebody asks you, hey doctor, what do you think about this? Can I send you a picture? Or hey doctor, what do you think? You've entered into a patient-practitioner relationship. So be very careful how and where you dispense advice online. We come to booklet 11, guidelines for over-servicing, perverse incentives, and related matters. Over-servicing is categorized as you trying to increase the plan of care of a patient by giving them more services than what they require. Okay? Now, obviously, this is up to the discretion of the practitioner. But at the same time, we have guidelines, we have standards of practice, we have clinical trials we can look at, we have guidelines that we can follow from our societies. And we know how long or how short a treatment cycle should be. When you are getting into the sort of marketing arena, one can feel the temptation to want to sell a type of program that would have that patient engage in a longer treatment cycle. Be very careful not to do that, okay? Again, it's very rare that you will be scrutinized because this is something that a patient would have to complain to the HPCSA on, and very seldom patients do that because they're not particularly clued up on the channels. But if you try and go down this road, you will end up burning yourself down the road. Do not engage in this. With regards to advertising, and here, I know Tasneem recently posed a question to me with regards to influencer marketing. I knew I was going to answer it. Yes, I didn't answer you on the forum over there. But if you are ever approached, let's say you grow a following online. You've got 20,000, 50,000. Some doctors in this country have upwards of 100,000 followers on various platforms. And you are approached by any one of our lovely vendors over here to do an affiliate deal with him. Be very careful about that arrangement. Okay? The HPCSA does not categorically say you may not enter into that relationship. It does say you have to declare it though. Okay? And that doesn't make for a very sexy ad if you're declaring it. It becomes a very sticky matter if you are promoting and promoting and promoting a product and there is a perverse incentive on the back end of it. Again, be professional, serve first, do no harm. Come back to those three again. So please declare any incentives you have, and of course be aware of improper financial gain and perverse incentives that lie in such agreements as well. Remember, many of our learned colleagues around here that are in the healthcare space are not subject to the HPCSA. And therefore, they might paint outside of lines that we cannot paint out of. So just be very aware that you are subject to this and make sure that you have the proper agreements in place and that you obviously let people know what's going on. Okay, booklet 16, my favorite one, the one on social media. Okay, so this is by far what I'm going to spend the most of my time on because it's also the opportunity that I see for you as a private healthcare practice. Social Medical, the company that I founded in 2018, was born out of a frustration of having to rely on external sources to dictate my patient flow. I, much like you, decided to knock on doors, build relationships with strategic referral sources, and found myself in a space where I constantly had to nurture that relationship. Eventually, it got to a point in some cases where it became, in my opinion, unethical, where certain practitioners would lord their referral over me and force me to do things for them, buy them wine, buy them cheese, take them on holidays, and allude to such things. And yes, these things happen in our profession. I have been approached numerous times. I can count more than on my one hand, where a clinician has said to me, Basil, I send a lot of work your way. I think that, it might be in your best interest to work with me here. They won't say it outrightly, but there are these implied kind of relationships. And I thought to myself, no, that this cannot be the case. Obviously, when that kind of thing happens, I do my best to bring them back to ethics. If they don't listen, I have to dissolve the relationship at that point because it becomes toxic. So I thought of a way of how I could make patients aware of what I was doing, bring them to my front door, and do so ethically. In 2024, everything is going online. Your very login process now was not a manual process, it was an online process. And that's where the world is heading in the next 5 to 10 years. If you do not have a presence online, you are going to be obsolete. But pray do tell, how do we do this without breaking these laws and guidelines? Allow me to show you a way that we can actually get that done. So what does the HPCSA actually say about this? Well, they allude to 2 pieces of legislation that have been put out by the Government Gazette, Promotion to Access to Justice, Act 3 of 2000, and we are looking for another one, Protection of Personal Information, POPI Act. So before you do anything online, you need to have a deep understanding of those 2 pieces of legislation released by our national government. Then you can go into the booklets of the HPCSA. Again, I'm going to skip through this. You can read through it in your own time, and I'll provide you with the documentation if you submit the form afterwards. Great. So again, going through the legislation there. So let's get into the actual booklet 16. Except in an emergency and life-threatening situation, if a patient is seeking healthcare advice over social media, should you intervene? Providing healthcare advice over social media to individuals whom a healthcare practitioner does not have a relationship with is discouraged. If health advice is shared online, it must be evidence-based, scientific, sound, and generic, and the recipient must be directed to consult with a healthcare practitioner in person before following through. And that particular clause is where I want to rest. Because what that allows for you to do is the HPCSA is very clearly saying to you, you may post information online. You may post on social media. You may educate, inform, and empower your patients. So anyone saying that you're posting online is unethical is categorically incorrect. It is the manner in which you do so. Your advice cannot be personalized. I would advise staying away from case studies. Make it generic. But you as a healthcare practitioner, what is your ambit? What is your core function as a healthcare practitioner? To empower the public and to give them the healthcare information they require to make the best decisions. And so, as a healthcare practitioner, you belong on social media. You belong on Google. You belong on a website. You belong on a TV show. Because what did we have before social media? We had TV shows on SABC1. We had TV shows on CakeNet. We have TV shows on Mnet. That is content. The only difference is the content is migrated from your TV screen to your cell phone. That is the only difference. Again, obtain written consent, and please stay away from minors. Do not film anybody under the age of 12 without their parents' consent. In fact, anyone under the age of 18 without their consent. It is not a very, it's not a space that you actually want to play in. Okay, obviously always include disclaimers in all of your social media, and you are advised to, err on the side of caution. If you're not sure that something's particularly appropriate for social media, it's probably best for you not to post it. Let me give you an example. You are a medical practice and there's a trend on Instagram. There's a song, there's a sound, and you and your front office are going to do this dance now. So it's like a hoedown dance or whatever, and you're doing this thing over here. And it's fun, it's engaging. It endears yourself to your existing patients. Can it be viewed as unethical? Well, let's go back to our 3 core tenets. Is it professional? Well, it depends on how you're doing the dance. If you are scantily clad dressed, if you are revealing yourself in ways that would not particularly be becoming of the profession, maybe not. Is it doing any harm? Are you doing something in that somebody might find offensive, that might be offensive to a particular culture or a particular group? Those are things you have to consider. Is the dance in itself unethical? Probably not. But consider those things before you do so. Remember, you have responsibility to the profession at large. And that's what I want you to focus on as well. I want to leave you here with an actionable plan. So if you were to ask me, Basil, how can I grow my practice? What's the best way to do so? I started my practice a couple of years ago, or my practice has come across hard times because I lost a major referral source. I want to diversify my client acquisition. How can I do so ethically, effectively, profitably, and scalably? I have only one answer for you. To reach the amount of people you need to reach to make that happen, your plan needs to be heavily leaning toward the online space. The online tools we have available to us now make it almost impossible for you not to be successful if you put the work in. Yes, traditional means do still work, and they form part of any good strategy, as I will demonstrate in a moment. But you have to think very, very carefully about the online space and making a presence for yourself there. Even if you have an existing, flourishing, thriving practice, just to maintain your current market share and your existing space in the mind of the consumer, you have to be present there. If you don't have a website, for example, you are not seen as professional in today's day and age. If you don't have at least a LinkedIn profile to communicate with your colleagues, it becomes very difficult for you to be taken seriously in the marketplace. These are things, these are tools, these are things that we have to take into consideration today. AI is coming, and the tools that come with it are insane. They are amazing, and they allow us to do things now that we would never ever dream of. You can write an entire blog article on a very, very, very specific type of treatment that is exceptionally nuanced. You can feed it a journal article, ask it to reference against that journal article, read it for clarification, put it into your own voice, and publish it as a blog post. And you can sound like the most intelligent specialist that the world has ever seen. And it will take you all of 10 minutes. You have to build a personal brand. There are three things people need to do business with you. They need to know you. That's obviously getting your awareness out. They need to like you. They need to like you as a person. We know as healthcare professionals how much healthcare is a personal choice. Sometimes we go and use people that we know are not the sort of like the very best, or at least heralded as the very best, but because we get on with them personally, okay? And they need to trust you. That last one is key, trust. And so you need to build a personal brand, and you can do this most effectively online, speaking on stages like this, or having your own event, will give you immense credibility to be able to make your services known. So you need to have a strategy, and you need to have a tactic. Creating a website, posting content online, doing a blog post, running Google ads, doing an event every once in a while is not a strategy. It is a tactic. It is a tool that you use in your quiver to hit a target. It is not a strategy. You cannot say my entire strategy is having a website. There is a tool that you can utilize. A strategy answers these questions over here. What is your North Star? What does your dream practice look like? What type of patients do you want to see? How many of them do you want to see? How often do you want to see them? And how much do you charge? Those questions will determine the strategy that you take in order to achieve your goal. Because if you're charging 300% of medical aid rate, you don't require that many patients, at least my hope, to make a living. You just require the right patients. So you need a strategy to find those people and where they are. Okay. So what are some common tactics used? Right now, these are the most common I see. They are, for the most part, very ineffectual, but sometimes they still work. Pamphlet drops. They're not scalable. They are effective every once in 6 months. They are a great way to get business into the door now. Can you build a strategy on it? Probably. Is it something you can rely on to bring on business regularly? Probably not. Building a referral base, tried, true, tested, one of the golden nuggets, a part of any practice in order to be successful. Word of mouth, the OG. No one is going to rave about your practice like your patients. They are your advocates. They are your marketing agents in the community. Treat them like gold, and they will send 3 back your way. Signage, still very effective. People need to know where you are. Be very careful about the type of signage you use. Only a couple of years ago, they were allowed signs. They were bigger than this, right, doesn't it? So be very careful about the type of signage and, of course, the messaging in it, referencing to all the previous legislation I've just gone through. Newspaper ads can sometimes be seen as egregious, can be sometimes seen as an ethical violation because it may be seen as you overstepping a boundary or positioning yourself as the only practitioner in that community that gives this service. Again, it's in the eye of the interpreter. Events, always a good thing to do. People get to see you, they get to talk to you, they get to see what you're like, and it builds trust with the community. Nothing does it like being in the flesh. So what does a well thought out strategy look like? Moving very quickly. This is a completely online digital strategy that allows you to reach up to, for a very small cost, probably close to 200 to 300,000 people every single month. and allows you to do that at a fraction of a cost of what it would be to print, let's say, 5,000 pamphlets. It's completely online and digital. It utilizes all the technology that we have available to us right now. It doesn't break a single ethical rule. What you're doing here is you're allowing your advertising platforms, which are compliant with the HPCSA ethics guidelines. You can run social media ads, again, dependent on the messaging. You can run Google ads, again, dependent on the messaging. And you can do traditional ways of advertising, door knocking, pamphlets, all the rest of that. That then leads to a booking request. Now you have to have a tight, dialed-in booking request. Do you know that over 75% of calls that go to the front desk for new patients are not answered or not handled correctly? The amount of business that you are losing at your front desk is immense. Look at that when you go back to your practice now. Tighten up that ship because you are losing money hand over fist. Then we move on. Let's say we got 150 inquiries on that. Most inquiries are people that have known about you. They might like you. They don't yet trust you. You need to build and nurture that trust. You can do that effectively by running a CRM, a customer relationship management tool, on the bottom, either through text or email, and by making sure that you feed them educational content. You are not bombarding the patient at the bottom here with saying, book an appointment at my practice, book an appointment at my practice, book an appointment. That's not the way to do it. That is harassing, it is unethical, it's not kind, it's not serving the patient first. What you are doing there is you are giving them valuable information about the very condition that they are looking to find a solution to. That's all you're doing. Those patients then lead to 5 more bookings, and 25 bookings come through your 150 inquiries. What you need to look at is you need to find, and go home, and this is a little bit of homework for you. Try and figure out how many inquiries you get per week. Then try and figure out how many of those inquiries actually lead to bookings. And see if you can't tighten up that metric as a first place to start. Then add fuel to the fire. If you've got a broken system, I wouldn't recommend adding more fuel to that fire. So in closing, some tactics that you can look at using right now: Google Ads and website SEO. Meta ads and content creation. Automation to tighten up the entire system. Email marketing is still so powerful, goes directly to the inbox. You don't have to pay a platform like Meta or a platform like Google to do it. Messaging on WhatsApp, only once you have the consent to message them. That's exceptionally important. And of course, events and meetings. Some points to ponder in closing. Serve first. Be the clinician that when you took that oath, you aimed to be. Ethical marketing works, unethical marketing does not. Have a plan, have a strategy, not tactics, and make sure you share your gift. Sometimes we think that because there's this clinician that has these amazing credentials, that we don't have people to serve. There are people out there looking for your unique genius. They're looking for your approach to healthcare. They're looking for you. And by you keeping that under a bowl and not shining your light, you're not doing any service to the world. So make sure you get out there, shine bright like a diamond, and let's change healthcare in this country. I firmly believe that marketing our services ethically has the power to change healthcare in South Africa by educating and empowering our communities with information so they can make better healthcare decisions. The responsibility is on you, though, to amplify that information. Use the digital tools that are available to you to make sure that happens. Thank you very much.